So then it's like, oh, turns out the key skill is not the data collection. It's the persuasion and influence piece. The ability to persuade is that it's like the one of the pillars in a marketing career.
Welcome to What Gets Measured, a NinjaCat podcast about marketing, performance management, metrics, and effectiveness. Because what gets measured gets managed. I'm your host, Jake Sanders. Colin Lewis is a CMO, columnist, educator, and investor working with a wide variety of businesses and brands across the globe, helping them understand and apply marketing fundamentals that get results and generate revenue. He's a multiple award-winning MBA qualified marketer with strong commercial nous. He also drives F1 sports cars, and today he's here to shift your understanding of the marketing profession into high gear. Colin, thanks for being here.
Thank you for inviting me, Jake. And some of that bio is even true.
So I'm glad we're not padding your resume unduly.
Well, if I was driving a Formula One car, I can encourage your audiences to throw money in my direction and make sure that and ensure that it'll never be seen again. It's the perfect way to spend their money on me.
It's the ROI of drive time. You're just going to take a couple laps with our cash. More than happy to do that. Well, let's jump into it. You always speak brilliantly about marketing, and in a recent post from Marketing Week, you spoke about the future of marketing careers. What barriers do you think the present moment is throwing at marketers looking to make a career out of this profession?
I suppose there's a couple of barriers. One of them is in our heads. But I'll come back to the barrier that's in our heads. But I write about marketing careers and think about marketing careers a lot because my own one has had its own ups and downs. And I think our audience has probably been prey to this idea that has happened to me, which is we see the outside world and it always appears to be this upward trajectory, onwards and upwards. And it turns out life is not like that. And because I'm slightly older, I realized too late that it's not like that. Right. So the first barrier, if you will, is the sort of consensus or the appearance of onwards and upwards. And the way my first takeaway for the audience is careers move in sine waves. Now, we all remember our physics lessons from school. Careers move in sine waves. And if you see anybody on an onwards and upwards trajectory, they're kind of not telling you the full story. So the first thing is what we hear outside. That's the first barrier. And the second barrier is there's a lot of, if you will, negativity talked in terms of marketing careers the odd time about, people don't know that much or they're too focused on this and so on. And I'm here to tell you, after a 25-year career, it is the best time ever, regardless of the country you live in, of the 200-something countries you live in the world, it is the best time ever to work in marketing by a long shot. Prior to this, it would have been kind of pretty much restricted to people working in certain key cities, certain key companies, and so on. Now, instead of having to be based in Los Angeles, LA, or New York, or these big cities, now all I need is access to the internet. And I might riff on that later because I actually do believe we're in the third great renaissance in many respects. And so the third barrier is the one I mentioned earlier, which is the one in our heads, which is we may either believe what we see elsewhere, we may either have thoughts about ourselves that mean we don't think we're quite good enough, all these other things. So they're the three big barriers that I believe are actually out there.
I love that. That's so awesome. And so thinking about marketing as something separate outside of business, it's like we just need to get some business going and then we'll find marketing. It seems like there's sort of a dichotomy in between these things, and marketing, it seems like an add-on or something. How do you think business fundamentals play into creating a marketing career with longevity? Should we be on the bleeding edge looking for the next thing, or should we be playing things more conservatively? I know this is sort of a jam-packed question, so you can unpack it how you feel.
Well, there's a couple of points there. I said, let's kind of speak about it sort of in the first person. I set up my business first, and then I need marketing later.
Right.
And I want to unpack that one just for a second, because this is a really interesting point. So let's say I'm in the majority of businesses are owner operated businesses. And typically owner operated businesses, whether it's a mom and pop or somebody who's an entrepreneur or somebody who's set up a startup, they see sometimes, for better or for worse, they see sometimes marketing as the thing I do later.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really around definitions and distinctions made. Of course, by definition, in the first place, if you have a customer for your product, you are doing marketing, period.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's why this is around labeling. Okay. So that the entrepreneur or the startup person who's saying, I built a great product, then I did marketing. What they're doing is confusing the word marketing with communications or advertising in many respects. But the fact they built an amazing product that he or she has put together and then has a customer for it means they did marketing in the first place. So there's a bit of a labeling problem there first.
Yes. Yeah.
And then going to the second part of the question, which is around how, is there a dichotomy? Is there a split between the two?
Right.
Well, sometimes it's easier for folks who want to have a marketing career to go along with this idea. Okay, to say, oh well, you did this amazing thing and now you need some marketing, and that's fine. Even though in your heart and soul, if you've studied marketing, that actually what's happened is they've actually done that. They've got the 4 Ps, they got the product, they got the price, they got the distribution, and they got everything in place. Now they're just literally talking about essentially marcoms or marketing communication.
Yeah,
and you know what? It's okay. It's okay. That's okay. Let's go along with that. Let's not try to boil the ocean here.
Sure.
And so, where does that leave us then? Okay. But what I say to people here in this case here is, if you go along with that story, or you're looking to recruit about this company, or you are that person who sees marketing as a separate thing, that's okay. What you want to do then go and say is, right, what are the levers? What are the tools? What are the channels that I now can put together to go and, pour fuel in the fire, if you will?
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually where a lot of people come to me. They come and say, Colin, what should I do next? And it's where they've kind of, if you will, gone through that first phase of development. And then it's like, okay, I've got something. In other words, they got product market fit if you're a startup, or whatever the phrase you want to use. By the way, product market fit is a fancy label for customers like our stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, we love fancy labels. Oh, God.
Yeah. Customers like our stuff. Okay, grand, no problem.
Easy. Yes.
Super. I'll go along with that. I don't mind. Okay. So then if that's the case, then you say, right, here's how you can pour fuel in the fire. And that's where, in many respects, obviously today, a lot of the conversations around content, conversations around digital, conversations around email, whatever it may be, I don't mind what you want to call it. They're essentially the channels to market that can enable growth. What I would encourage people listening to this is that if you're a content marketer, or if you're a person who does AdWords, or a person who does Facebook, performance marketer, whatever, I don't mind what you call it. Okay, it is very helpful to understand the context that all operates in, and go and say, what I'm working on is the communications aspect of how we make it happen. And the communications aspect is super important. But if you just back up a little bit before that and understand the context you're operating in, the product, the pricing, and everything, there's going to be so many more levers to come from. And to kind of wrap up this point, you will build your career with a lot more sort of you'll have a better platform for your career if you understand that. So that's why I'm a big fan of marketing education, because then the doors will open for you a lot more. I've met a lot of CMOs in my life. I've been a CMO, and I'm sure we can riff on that later, Jake, but it's not about the thing and the technical aspect. That's for sure, if you want to go higher.
So, and now speak towards this bleeding edge. Like, whoa, we need to get a metaverse strategy. Whoa, we need to be on every social media channel. Whoa, we need whatever, branded podcasts, short form videos. That kind of falls into the content marketing thing. How do you talk to people about getting them off of the cliff of the bleeding edge, or playing more conservatively? Is it about their context, understanding if their context would it makes sense? You should,
Perfect. It's a great question, and let's kind of look at that in its kind of individual bits. And what I would encourage people to do is to go and say, when somebody asks you this, and I'll give you a story about this in a second, but when somebody asks these questions, is don't be dismissive. There's a lot of people dismissive about, somebody asked me about a metaverse thing. Don't be dismissive about anything. That's just not cool. Okay.
Yeah, it isn't.
It's not cool. I mean, I mean cool. I don't mean trying to be cool. It's just like, how do you know? Are you
Right.
the omniscient person in the universe that you know nothing's going to? No. So just go. Person comes to you. Typically now, and this is where I go into my little story. Anybody of any marketing experience, whether it's 2 years or 20 years, will have had this experience, and their boss, no matter who they are, will come up to them and say, "Jake, what are we doing on X?" Now, X 10 years ago was, Jake, what are we doing on Twitter?
Right.
And then maybe 8 years ago, Jake, what are we doing on Instagram?
Mhm.
And today it's, a year ago, what are we doing on TikTok? Or today, what are we doing in the metaverse?
Yep.
And it's, for the most part of my career, I've been sat there with my, is it rabbit in the headlights? Deer in the headlights,
Right.
going, And now I've got a way of kind of responding to that, okay? Which is, I'll buy time and I'll use the classic politician's line of saying, "Great question," which is code for, "I'm trying to think out what the hell is the answer to this."
Yeah.
So, Jake, great question, which is code for, I'm buying 5 seconds to work out what the hell to say.
And you just said my name, so I'm feeling like $1 million, and I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
he knows.
Jake, I'm very impressed with that question. Really, it's an awesome question, which is all code for, I don't know what I'm going to say next. Okay?
Fair.
So then I go and say, right. So if we talk, and then I get into the piece bit. Okay, so you're talking about you're asking me, why aren't we on Instagram? So, Jake, you might remember that we discussed that what we wanted to do with this business was that we wanted to hit objective X and hit objective Y. And to do that with our target customer segment, they are on channels X, Y, and Z. And that's essentially where our budget was on. Now, if you want us to go on Instagram, that's great. What we will do is slice and dice up our budget a bit more and look at it a different way and include it in that channel. Because, and sometimes you don't want to be rude to the person and go and say, "That's a terrible idea." You go and say, "Well, Instagram is quite a visual channel with a lot of brand. We'll test it and we'll give it a go. And I'll come back to you in a few weeks' time," which is all code for, okay, you've totally blown the strategy,
the plan,
3 months ago. Water, but that's okay. Let's not be, rude. So if somebody comes to you today and says, "Colin, what's our metaverse strategy?" Again, parse it out a little bit. You say, "Well, it's a good question. We have an agreed plan and we have an agreed budget, and that's what we want to do." Now, the metaverse is so cutting edge. How do we think about it? It's actually not just bleeding edge. It's there's no blood because it can't be bleeding edge. It's so edgy. Yeah.
Right.
So if we want to go invest some of our time and so on, what we want to do is just be reassured that this is what I'll call a very early stage innovation thinking that we're doing, and that we're not expecting a huge ROI. Now, a little hint for anybody who does get asked this question might be to say this, which will help you, which is to say something like this, which is, 10 years ago, a lot of people miss out on opportunities. If they were earlier on the likes of Instagram or whatever, they could have got a lot of traction. Their cost per click, their CTA, their CPC, whatever particular thing you want to judge things by, would have been lower. So if you believe that's the strategy that you would like us to do, let's go test it out. However, what we want to go and say very clearly, this is innovation, this is bleeding edge. There's not an ROI on this particular thing, but we're test and learn. And the reason I'm speaking like this is that if somebody tells you to do this thing, you want to make sure that your neck is not on the line for something that will not have a return on investment.
Absolutely.
At all.
Oh, yeah.
So you need to have a thing. And actually, Jake, we should riff on this, okay?
Okay.
It's politics with a small p. When I say politics with a capital P, people are obsessed. They think I'm talking about, what goes on in Congress or in the Senate and what have you. I don't refer to that, okay? We have a sort of taboo in many, in business, and podcasts, and in whatever, not to talk about politics with a small p.
Right.
But politics with a small p is how the world works. Yeah.
Yeah.
If there was no politics, I would say Jake, you're a complete ass. I never want to talk to you again. And it would be, well, of course, what we do is we grease the wheels of industry by saying, Jake, you're a great guy. Love your work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which doesn't mean anything. Okay.
Could be true.
That's what
could not be.
It could be true, could not be true. Yeah. But it's what we do in our day jobs. We play a game. Actually, the human condition is to play a game. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the world of marketing, you've got to play a game. You've got to play a role. And the role is not a bad role. It's a nice role. And so you got to play a little bit of politics. And you can't go and say, with the voice in your head saying, that's the most idiotic idea I've ever heard to say we're going to go into the metaverse. That is what's called a CLM, Jake, a career limiting move.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Don't want to make
so
those.
What you do, you don't want to make that. So you don't go and say, Jake, that is the most idiotic thing I've ever said, and never darken my door again.
Yeah.
And it turns out you said that to your boss, and now you're darkening the door on the way out of the building. Yeah. So then you go and say, we got to play politics with a small p, and always be cognizant of that. What we will find, and I'll wrap up this point now. What we find is a lot of people talk about what one should do, and it would not kind of like thinking about the practicalities of what one can do. The old phrase is politics is the art of the possible, but they're referring to politics with a capital P.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, turns out in your day job, in your career, politics, small p, is the art of the possible. It may be, the right thing for you to go on television and buy an ad at the Super Bowl. But that's not possible because you don't have the budget to do that. But the conversation, if you will, on the internet about what people should do in marketing makes you think you're a loser, that you haven't done an ad during the Super Bowl, or you haven't installed, you haven't done every single page of How Brands Grow by Byron Sharp. No, we're in the art of the practical and what's possible.
Love that.
Because we're in dealing with human nature and human condition.
And it's weird for a profession that's based, I mean, you're right. Everybody's really hard on that communications. Like it's just all about talking to people. But even if that was just how you conceived of marketing, you would still really need to have a broad fundamental understanding on how exchanges of information happen in between people, which a lot of Marcom professionals don't. They're thinking it's just transmit, put the brand promise, the USP in there, and there's never enough room. They're setting traps, but they're not leaving room for the mouse. It's just all cheese. And so I think you're really hitting on something, interesting, that it is a political game. And I know a lot of creatives particularly are frustrated with that game, because they have to kind of make a case for what they want, or they have to sort of stand up for an idea that just should be so obvious, So I think a lot of careers are limited. There is some CLM happening in regards to people not really wanting to play that game because they're thinking what you should do and not what you can do. I love that dichotomy.
Jake, what I do want to reinforce for your audience, if there's even a moment where they're thinking that I'll have this sorted, and I did have this sorted, so I want to disavow them of that notion. In my head, there is the voices, the many voices in my head, but the voices in my head are always like, why, Jake's my boss and I'm Colin, Jake, you idiot. How come you can't see this is the greatest idea in the history of the universe?
So obvious, right?
The wheel, it's so obvious. And, Jake's looking at you blankly thinking in his head, the voices in his head is like, you're an idiot. Yeah. And that's the laws of human nature kind of thing,
right.
And so within this thing, and it's kind of one of the points that I think I didn't believe it enough, particularly in my 20s and early 30s, is, first of all, it's the art of the possible.
Right.
That's the first thing. But the second bit is a core skill. It's not necessarily being amazing at AdWords or what have you. Is this idea of persuasion with a small p. And I don't mean persuasion as in, it's persuasion as in influence. Yeah.
Yeah.
In, I need to be able to sell my ideas. And we've all been there. We've all known, where you're in this situation where you're like, this is the correct answer. I've done all the data. I got the work. I got the backup. I got the file and whatever. And they go, that's a terrible idea. We're not doing that. And you're like, you go home and you're crying, going, this person's an idiot. Well, it turns out we're all idiots. I'm sure people have said that about me when I've been there, boss.
Sure. I've heard it for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So then it's like, oh, turns out the key skill is not the data collection, it's the persuasion and influence piece. The ability to persuade is that it's like the one of the pillars in a marketing career.
It's amazing. And now we're up to like 6 P's. So price, placement, persuasion, politics,
actually, that's a good point. I'm a genius. I've come up with 6 P's.
No. We don't need any more P's. Everybody in the audience says, how many P's are there? Oh my God, what kind of P's are there? No, well,
I'll come up with a few more if you want.
You bring up a really interesting point about data collection. And that leads to this next question, because if modern marketers are they have all the dashboards, all the decks, all the Kantar, stats, everything, this is from, Harvard Business Review, or, this is from a book. And, I think a lot of people are leaning on data and analytics, but how does data literacy and like skill with analytics play into a marketer's career? You've said that software is eating marketing. So how can we use technology to code success into the profession, or are we facing our Isaac Asimov iRobot moment?
Well, data-driven marketing is something I see on almost every job spec. It's just insane how often I see it. And I get a bit confused myself about how much they're looking for it. So, let's just kind of move out and look at the picture. Go say data-driven marketing. It's about keeping score of all the major marketing activities, such as brand and consumer metrics, or financial metrics, or performance and campaign metrics, or insight metrics. And that's kind of really what it is. There's actually a book called Data Driven Marketing by Mark Jeffrey. And I'm pretty sure that any of the people who put these job specs together have not read this book, because he doesn't refer to it in the way that people talk about it in the specs. So I'm going to parse this out for people, because I actually had to go back to the source myself to work it out, because my brain wasn't smart enough. So data is just data. It's numbers on a page. It's things on a spreadsheet. Information is taking that data and turning it into something that's kind of like usable. So that's the information. Instead of just like numbers on a page, I've maybe put a chart or a report together, and then it means it's digestible and understandable. Now, the insight is what I get from looking at that information. It kind of gets closer to, okay, I've just observed something in this piece of information. Then the next step is this idea of action. Okay, now I've got this insight, the kind of perspective on the information, and then I'm going to do something, my action piece. And then at the end of this point is, I then sort of embed that thinking in my sort of knowledge. And in fact, the stuff we talked about earlier on about careers and so on, the reason I can speak fluently about this stuff is kind of, I've seen the data, I've got the information, I've picked up a collection of insights, I've acted on it and had the bad results of good results, and now I've got the knowledge. And the knowledge is something that can be used across industries, across situations, across businesses. And so that's why I go and say, for our audience here, data-driven is important, but what I want you to do is go and ladder up. Ladder up. Don't use the word data in your mind. Say to other people, yeah, great. But what you really want to be is a person who can put it into information that I can create an insight from. Therefore, I can act on it. Therefore, I have knowledge on it.
Woo, and there's something crazy about embedding. I think, how many monthly reports are you seeing? How many metrics, daily stuff, like with the numbers and sales figures and then projections. I think we take in so much data and information, we forget to drive insights and then embed those things. And I'm just kind of like hit with the idea of, man, I've seen a lot of things and I've learned a lot of, line graphs, bubble charts, heat maps, all those things. But did I put anything into my head for the future, or laterally take those things and apply them to different places across the business spectrum. Like I'm really thinking a lot of people know how to observe the analytics and maybe create some insights, but they're not embedding the thinking. I mean, does that kind of stick out to you? It sticks out to me.
Yeah, the embedding piece is a great point there, and the reason is that's like it's kind of explicit knowledge or implicit knowledge. So if you embed it in you, you can be implicit. So conversion rates in industry X are typically 3.57%. Okay, and so when you walk into a company and it's like 1%, you can go, well, explicit. Explicitly, I know this is wrong. We need to do something. I would encourage. There's a statement I read. I deliberately about 10 years ago went after the old school direct marketing folks and read a lot about the old school 1950s and 60s direct marketing folks.
Yeah.
And they're pretty hard ass, and they're not very politically correct. They're not the sort of punters that you necessarily would be, believing in their political views, but
Sure.
their point around direct mail and direct marketing are still very interesting because they were always very good copywriters.
Right.
But one of the phrases that I picked up from this is this idea of the numbers need to speak to you. The numbers need to speak to you. And so this is this idea of implicit and explicit knowledge, whereby, Jake puts a dashboard in front of me and I can look at it and go, querying of and clanking of the chains in my mind. And then I can go, I know what this is saying. It's saying this. Bang, we can do that.
Yes.
That's really the numbers need to speak to you. So when you're listening to these people talking about data-driven this and what have you, what I would say is, in your mind, I want you to move up a level above that and say, I want to create this into implicit and explicit knowledge so that I can use this across situations, across time.
Ah, man, I love that. So let's get into story mode. Let's get into some data storytelling here on our end. Do you have like a Cinderella story about careers in marketing? Someone who's pivoted properly and avoided the pitfalls? And conversely, do you have any horror stories where there was some CLM and marketing legacies were cut short?
Well, I'm an example of both of those. And
the sine wave. We're in the middle of the sine wave, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, we're always in the middle of the sine wave, and so what I would suggest, and I'm going to try and speak to every age group here if I can.
Yeah.
So you're sort of between the age of sort of 20, let's call it 20 and 30, because I can't work out sums. 20 and 30 it's kind of like the upwards part of that sine wave. Okay, and typically what happens around, we'll call it 30, but it can be anytime between 29 and 33, but we'll call it 30. Is something happens in the person's career and they've had an onward and upward trajectory, and then something happens and then there's a little bit of a downward slope, sometimes quite a steep downward slope. It's not always self-inflicted. It can be inflicted with just reality hitting you. Mm-hmm. Now, as it happens, Jake, is that a lot of people come to me and ask me for career advice. I'm pretty sure it's for my incredible charm and good looks, but also alternatively, it could be just more pragmatic, which is when they hear some of what I'm talking about, they're like, okay, I can maybe tune into that.
Right.
And about 80% of that is women actually come to me, maybe 90%. Okay. And that's definitely because of my incredible good looks.
Yeah. But, I want everybody to know I asked Colin to turn his video off because he was driving me crazy. I was like, I need my heart meds. Oh,
yeah.
Anyway,
exactly. Yeah. So there's a kind of a career thing that goes downhill during your 30s, and typically you might kind of get an uphill slope as you get to your early 40s, and then there's another hit that occurs, and you might not have reached that particular role you wanted to get. You might have not been made marketing director and so on. There's a downward slope, and then again another upward slope. Typically mid to late 40s as well. Okay, once you're in your 50s, who knows? All bets are off. It's all very different at that stage. Yeah? And so what I want to say is that the Cinderella piece. Now, the Cinderella piece is very interesting, and I think there's going to be a lot more Cinderella stories, and I'll explain why.
Yes.
To date, and the reason why I say it's the greatest time ever to be in marketing. To date, the way people used to judge Jake or Colin or Mary or Patricia or whoever, I would say they'd come in the door, whether they're 25, 35 or 45 and say, they wouldn't quite say it as explicitly as I'm about to say it, but they basically say, I am judging you based on the previous company you worked for.
Mm-hmm.
So if you work for Procter and Gamble and Unilever, you are automatically got a stamp of approval. If you work for a company called Jake Sanders Incorporated, who found the cure for cancer, that doesn't matter, because what they do is they use the company they work for as the proof point that you're good, and that's fine. That's kind of just using a way of doing so.
Yep.
As a way of checking whether people are good or not.
Right.
So it's kind of a mechanism. It's like getting into Harvard. Did you pass the entrance exam? So that has been the case for a long time, and it still is the case for a long time. However, for the first time in history of careers, you can have worked for, Jake Sanders Inc., which nobody has ever heard of, but because you've got a piece of domain expertise in, I don't care, TikTok, Shopify, you're a real amazing copywriter and you can do amazing things in email. You can use MySQL to go and deep dive some analytics that Google Analytics doesn't tell you. You can work Google Shopping like a maniac. You can create amazing user experiences using design tools.
Right.
So the technical aspect is now very important, and all the other stuff around because you work for X company, you're automatically amazing is going by the wayside. I saw a job spec from a very well-known company in the US yesterday. They were asking, I'm doing this capability study work at the moment.
Right.
And very clearly in writing it, they said, if you have come from a startup background, or if you have come from a fast growth background, possibly even in a tech company. Now, this company was very far removed from being a tech company. They were more in the sort of consumer goods business, CPG business. And they will say, we will talk to you. And so for the first time, Cinderella opportunities are there. And that's why I always say when people talk to me, I say, what's the thing you're really amazing at? I don't want to know about the fact that hey, Jake, I'm good at everything. I'm really good at this. No,
Swiss Army marketer. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a book by called David Epstein, and it's called Range. Okay. And people take it as though he's saying, oh, you got to be good at everything. He's not. He actually says very clearly, you want to be an expert in 2 or 3 things, but it's the range of being an expert in 2 or 3 things is what matters. Whereas people think, oh, I'm good at everything. No. The idea is you want to be a pie-shaped marketer. I don't mean pie as in you've eaten too many pies. I mean pie, the pie 3.14.
Yeah.
Thing, if not pie. Because career futures, the Cinderella career of the future, is the combination of expertise rather than just being good at one thing. It's the combination. It's the pie shape, or the sort of 3-shaped person, if you will, is going to be the future.
So you said something really interesting in the back you said something interesting just a minute ago about the large majority of people looking for advice are women. To me, yeah. So no, but it kind of is hinting on something where there is a sort of ethos in like, how do these mediocre men get so far in their career? Like, there's a lot of other things that are holding, dynamics within, gender and in inequality and stuff like that. But you're saying something interesting is that women are more interested in developing, seeking out understanding, and men don't do that as much. I mean, I don't want to get too hard on the gender thing, but
I'm about to make a massive generalization, so please do not quote me on this, everybody.
Disclaimer, here we go.
Yeah, disclaimer. In my experience, okay, and I am not representative, annoyingly enough, I'm not representative of the human race, and the rest of the human race doesn't listen to me that often, which is obviously quite irritating.
Yeah.
But in my experience, doing 11 years of teaching evenings for like a very long time, 10 years of workshops, tons of online training, about 80 to 90% of the people who get in touch with me are women. As I say, it's possibly because I'm incredibly good looking.
Right.
And they're asking me stuff as a relation to careers. And it's not all over the world. I'm talking like people from Italy, Bosnia, Colombia, Australia,
Mm-hmm.
all over the world. It's not
Mm-hmm.
like people down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's one very pragmatic, simple thing, which is that more than 50% of marketers are women. So by definition, there's going to be more of them asking. It's not like it's like a 10% thing. But my huge generalization I want to point out is they're more interested in asking for help on one side, and then on the other side, there's a little bit of lack of either imposter syndrome or I would say lack of self-belief. That's not quite right because they've had some success in their careers. There's maybe a moment of like where, am I doing the right thing? And maybe this person may know more.
And which
And
I
that,
will say, and my generalization there is men don't ever think like that. They're just idiots, and they're like, I can handle it. And sometimes they can, sometimes
well,
they can't, but it's going to be figured out in the end. Because I've worked for a lot of mediocre mother.
I was that person, as in, I can even
Not you,
observe it
Colin.
myself, going, no, I mean, I observe it myself going, well, I wouldn't ask anybody. And I know why I wouldn't have asked anybody. Yeah. I wanted to ask, but there was two reasons. One is I didn't have role models or people to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
And so they wouldn't have had your sort of experience and
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of insight what I had at the time would have been that they couldn't see my worldview, so they would have been going, "This is a crazy question. This guy's a loser. I'm not talking to them."
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Or B, it would be coming from a position of sort of defensive arrogance, if you will, which is
Mm-hmm.
I'm slightly arrogant. I think I have the answer, and I'm also don't want to kind of expose myself. Yeah,
Right.
and I
Yeah.
think that if I'm going to make some huge generalizations about men, is that they possibly don't want to expose themselves. Now, people do, and they do get in touch
Absolutely.
with me,
No, make that
and
generalization, man. It's totally true.
yeah,
Yeah.
and they do, when people do get in touch with me, one of the things that they do go and say is, "I'm not even sure what I'm asking, or I'm not even sure what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying here." And
Mm-hmm.
that's where I talk about the career sine waves and stuff like that. And so that's why I've kind of made it my sort of like, people use the word side hustle. For me, this is not a side hustle. It's the one thing, having had some career troughs and career highs. But basically, anybody who asks me for career advice, I give it to them because I can kind of see inside their mind. I can see their
Mm-hmm.
other perspective.
Mm.
Whether they do anything, different topic, but it's kind of one of my kind of passion things.
Well, I love that. And I think there's something about the passion angle that really unlocked my marketing career is that I'm sort of was a self-hating jazz musician. And I have a
Mhm.
jazz performance degree. I don't have a marketing degree. I don't have a business degree. So I was spent a lot of the first half of my marketing career scared. I was like, I don't know business. And then I realized if you just make your thing, which is making music and being, on the mic and all these things, if that's your thing, lean into that. And then you can open up these, pathways. And I think I sort of unconsciously or subconsciously took that advice and it completely freed me because I was like, don't hide your jokes. Be silly. Don't hide your music. Share your music. And then back it up with your marketing strategy stuff, and then so it sort of opened up this gateway for me to be myself and then show up more fully to the marketing gig. And so, I mean, I guess I'm just kind of speaking on my behalf. It's
Well,
just like,
I'll give you an example. I'm going to try and capture what you said here. My back is turned because I'm looking for a particular book behind me. But there's two elements of what you just said there. I'll give it one is a label that I only learned a couple of years ago. So I spent a lot of time getting some coaching, and you'll see these coaching books here behind me,
nice,
and
yeah.
they're proper entrepreneurial coaching. It's not like coaching, life coaching. No, it's
Right,
entrepreneurial
yeah.
coaching. And Dan Sullivan, the guy I do, the leading entrepreneurial coach in the world, he has this phrase called unique ability.
Mm,
And he said the unique ability piece is where you're doing something that you could almost see yourself doing for the rest of your life. It's something that you came from the factory with. And integrating your unique ability into what you do means it's not actually as much work as you think. And I was like, initially when I heard that, I was like, that sounds like a load of rubbish because I'm a cynical Irish person. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, you know what? Let's just look at um, what one is good at that other people say you're good at.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the interesting point. I'm going to come back to the jazz in a second because I'm going to riff on that for you,
Yeah.
okay, for the audience. So if this kind of unique ability is the thing you came from the factory, well, it turns out that I can remember being 7 years old, and I'm not very tall, and I was a kind of a skinny kid. And so the thing is, every man listening to this particular show will remember the thing about being a skinny kid is you get the crap kicked out of you a lot. Okay.
I know
And
what you're
what
talking
is the
about.
only way yeah, what is the only way to be able to cope with that? It's through words. And so it turns out I remember thinking, observing myself years ago, going, "Oh, actually, I was actually okay with words, and I was reasonably articulate." And yeah, I just didn't know it. It just didn't come alive. So
Hmm.
the audience, first of all, what I would say is, there's this concept called unique ability, and what I want you to do is, what's the thing people have always said to you and say you're really good at that, and you go, "Oh no, 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 that's not me."
No. Yeah.
So it's the thing you came from the factory with. And,
Mm.
if I look at my parents and my background, particularly on my mother's side, they're very good and quite outgoing and stuff. And the more I tapped into that, the better. Yeah.
Mm.
And
Mm.
guess what? The more that I did that, the better my career got, rather than kind of be worried about it, as you're saying. I took my jazz performance stuff and brought it together.
Yeah.
Now, but for the audience, and you don't know this, Jake, but I'm a massive jazz fan. Okay,
Oh,
and
oh,
I'm
love
not very
that.
good on the piano. I'm not very good on the piano, but I've always tried to learn jazz piano. And
Yeah.
there's a few hiccups in that. Is I'm not very good on timing, which of course, if you play jazz, that's obviously
Could have
a
to need that.
critical. Yeah, very good at it. And the swing happens on beat 2 and 4.
Yep.
And so, when you're trying to learn jazz, one of the best trainers and teachers of jazz also happens to be one of the best trumpeters. His name is Clark Terry.
Hmm.
And Clark Terry has this particular phrase, and this is for the audience. He has this phrase. He said, it comes from this idea that when you're learning jazz, what you've got to do is listen to the jazz greats, and you do transcription and you copy directly. So, for instance, if you're familiar with Miles Davis, you probably have heard of the album Kind of Blue. It's one of the best-selling jazz albums ever. You definitely have heard. The whole audience here has heard Kind of Blue, and you'll know every track. And you to transcribe that until you can play it.
Mm.
And Clark Terry has this phrase called first you imitate, then you assimilate, and then you innovate. And so there's a real insight into this thing. Think about this. One of the great jazz players plays trumpet like you wouldn't believe.
Oh, yeah.
And he tells you to imitate, which then means you can assimilate, and then that means you can personally innovate. And hence why I want to wrap up this point by saying you will hear a lot of BS talked about creativity. And jazz is one of the most creative artist endeavors in the world.
Yeah.
And the greatest teachers and the greatest players all tell you that the first thing you need to do is copy or imitate. And then you assimilate. Then you can innovate.
And can we please just riff a little bit on advertising and marketing? Is that no one is looking at the past greats of advertising. No one is looking at any campaign that came before 2008 or something. Like the massive Bill Bernbach stuff, in the 60s. In the 50s, and then even going back, I'm not too crazy on Claude Hopkins, but that scientific advertising that came out in the 20s, and some of the most creative, examples of headline writing, direct copy came from the late 1880s. So it's very interesting. And I was sort of riffing on this on Twitter the other day, is like, there is such an ageism problem in marketing that you trust a random dude in a hoodie more than you will people who have long since proven that they knew what they were doing. Can you just, before we move on?
There's two, actually, this is a great point. There's two elements I kind of want to kind of tune into here. One is, let's just talk about history rather than, history of advertising or history of marketing.
Sure.
The line about history is, those who don't know history are
doomed to repeat it. Yeah, right. Yeah.
And the more I've got a bit older, I've like, because okay, I'll go and have a look at a little more history. Did okay in school. But I was like, hold on a second, a lot of this stuff is just kind of repeating. And,
Yes.
myself and my wife, we go to a lot of these, we're big fans of art history. She's got an art history degree. We go to these art history museums,
Love that. You guys are so cool. Okay.
And we look at this stuff, and then we end up going to this thing from 8th century. Is it 8th century? I think it's 8th century BC, the Sumerians. And they're like, oh, it's the same stuff. Politics, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, where are we going with this? What I want to say is then, if we look at the history of our careers here, advertising, marketing, it's actually a superpower to know this. Let's just take, say, for instance, where did Sears come from? Well, Sears had a catalog. Why was there a catalog? Well, because in the US, that people couldn't go to town to go to a store. There wasn't really a store. So direct mail came from catalog marketing in the 1850s. The Sears catalog they bought from. And as a result of that, they learned how to write to go and sell, because then it was a letter that was then sent in to buy. And so if you understand your history, then you can go and say, right, okay, that's where copywriting comes from. Maybe the person who wrote the Sears catalog might have been an amazing copywriter because they had to, yeah. Or turns out direct marketing, direct copy is essentially what the cornerstone of pretty much all Facebook advertising, a lot of Google advertising. So that's number one, or email advertising, or email marketing.
Right.
But then if you look at, say, where in the 50s did the idea of TV commercials come from? Well, if you know your history, you will go and say, well, you listen to your ad agency, or, I'm about to make a massive generalization, but you'll kind of believe that the 30-second ad came perfectly, created as the thing that was absolutely fantastic, and it was great for creating brands. And all we need to do, according to all the data, is go and do that.
Right.
Now, the 30-second ad didn't come from that at all whatsoever. Okay. What happened was, in the mid-50s, you've probably heard of the notion of soaps. But that was because Procter & Gamble funded radio ads, and then subsequently TV ads. And a gentleman called Pat Weaver came up with the idea that instead, because he had worked in magazine advertising in the late 40s, and instead of saying, I am going to use this 1-hour show and sell the whole slot to a sponsor, what if I do like a magazine where I split the ads up into each page? And a magazine is like, let's say there's 50 pages in a magazine. I sell 25 pages. I essentially sell 25 pages for ad.
Yep.
What if I had my hour and I slipped all that up? Okay. And I think he was the head of NBC at the time. And I'm sure there's people who are fanatics listening to this that who might know it better than I'm about to phrase it. But in principle, what he did was go and say, let's slice and dice the 1-hour bit. And very quickly, what happened was, it just purely in terms of inventory and ability to actually sell, and also to the way the TV worked and the broadcasting and all the rest of it, that 1 minute was the one they were able to use. And then eventually they were able to, in the UK, slice it down to 30 seconds. So that 30-second TV ad that everybody in advertising says is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and that's what the only thing you need to, came from an arbitrary thing. Now, as it turns out, 30 seconds is quite a good amount of time, as Paul Feldwick told me about, which is like, it's quite a good amount of time to go and communicate the story. But that is a strategic byproduct, or a happy byproduct, I should say, of something that somebody else was copying from how magazine ads were done and wanted to apply it to TV. So this is the idea of, if you understand your TV, by the way, quick insider gossip that to make you sound good when you go to the coffee shop or to the pub tonight.
Yeah.
Pat Weaver is the father of Sigourney Weaver of Aliens fame and Alien fame.
Yeah,
So,
love that.
Piece of trivia that is completely useless, except when you go to the pub tonight.
You can impress your fellow marketers. No, but it's something about that Clark Terry, quote about us imitating, assimilating, and innovating, is that you need to understand what you're going to imitate before you can innovate. And then you need to embed that thinking. And so I think we've kind of taken almost everything and condensed it into a fine compote that we can drizzle over our brains. But I'm going to ask you one final question. If you could condense everything that we just talked about into one piece of advice for the audience, for marketers out there on about how to make a living in this profession, what would that one piece of advice be?
You know more than you think you know. if you've done the homework around studying the past and understanding the past, you can be as good as anybody else that's out there. And how do I know this? Because I think we're in the third, in general, we are living in the third great renaissance, although people don't believe it. Okay. The first renaissance was in the Greek Republic, 400 BC, 350 BC, but that was only men in one city in the world. Second renaissance was in around Florence and Venice in the 15th century. Again, that was mostly for men, and that was like a second kind of great flourishing, followed by the Enlightenment thereafter. But today, anybody, as Seth Godin writes, anybody with access to the internet, and today with a 4 and 5G smartphone, owns the factory and owns the means of communication. So whether I'm in Lagos, London, or Los Angeles, I have the same power. That has never happened in the history of the world before, ever. And so that's why I say we're in the third great renaissance. Is the greatest time ever to work in marketing. All these tools are pretty much for free. I'm old enough to remember, even just 20 years ago, nothing was like this. To make the factory, I had to get a loan, buy and create a factory. Now the factory is the phone, the advertising agency is the phone, and we can up and running in a business in 15 minutes. It's the greatest time ever. I don't listen to the naysayers. That's what I will leave you with. You are in the best time, and it doesn't matter what race, color, creed, or part of the world you're from. We all have access to the same thing.
Preach it, Colin. So people are, their brains are probably overflowing with all the information that they got, all the inspiration that they've got. They're going to maybe instigate some change in their own careers and their organizations, and maybe they want to reach out and touch you. How can people connect with you and find out more about you online, Colin?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at my name, which is at Colin, but there's an A in the middle, Colin A. So at Colin A. Lewis. So you find me on Twitter. You can find me on LinkedIn. There's not that many Colin Lewis with an Lewis on LinkedIn. And if you search me under, on Marketing Week, you search Colin Lewis Marketing Week, and you'll find me through there as well. But get in touch, guys. I'm very approachable. Besides being incredibly good looking and charming, as we all know.
Yeah, you said it 3 times. He's so hot.
Yeah, that's what I keep saying to my wife. And she's like, yeah, Colin, whatever.
She's like, I'm an art history major. I know what's hot.
yeah, and you idiot.
Cheese or chocolate?
But are you ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, cheese or chocolate?
Cheese.
Regret or doubt?
Doubt.
Kittens or puppies?
Oh, puppies.
Oh, that's a no-brainer. Texting or calling?
Ooh, calling.
Like a good... It's nice to speak to people. Witches or wizards?
Oh, jeez. Wizards.
Okay. And finally, big party or small gathering?
Oh, small gathering.
Yeah.
Depending on how you catch me. Possibly on a good day, I'll be like big gathering.
What Gets Measured is a NinjaCat podcast. Please rate and review the show wherever you find your podcasts. Share this episode on social, and visit us on the web at ninjacat.io.